Masechet Nazir Daf Lamed Tet. Fascinating sugya today that's going to ask a basic scientific question about hair. How does hair grow? From its tips or from its roots? And we'll see the halachic ramifications of that. So Mishnah teaches, Setam Nazirut Sheloshim Yom. This we know already, that if you do not specify the length of a Nazirut, then it's going to be 30 days. And in fact, 30 days is the shortest possible amount of time one can be a Nazir. Gileach o shegilhuhu listim soter sheloshim yom. Nazir shegileach ben bezug ben beta'ad o shesifsef kol shehu hayav. If someone shaved before the time was up during his Nazirut, whether he did it to himself or if thieves, robbers came and instead of saying your money or your life, they said your money or your hair, and they I don't know, maybe they tortured him or something, and for whatever reason they cut or shaved his hair. That negates 30 days of his counting. And so if it was altogether 30 days, then he has to go back to the beginning and count again. If it was for longer, then he just has to go back and stay a Nazir for an extra 30 days. The reason is, it's not that it really actually cancels. It's not like Tumat Met, in which case he retroactively was not, it stops the Nazirut and he has to go back and do the whole thing again. Here he's continuously a Nazir the whole time. The problem is that part of the concluding ceremony for a Nazir is having to shave his head with a razor. And now if he doesn't have enough hair to shave, then he won't be able to fulfill the concluding ceremony. And that's why he has to allow it to grow for another 30 days. So it really doesn't matter if it was on purpose or by mistake or if it was his fault or not. He just needs that 30 days of hair growth. Okay, a Nazir who did shave his hair, whether he did it with scissors or with a razor, or he pulled it out, any amount, that person is chayav lashes. Okay, you don't have to bring a korban or anything, unlike Tumat Met, where it stops the whole thing at you bring korbanot and you start all over again. Here it is chayav, but chayav only lashes, but not korbanot. Okay, so that is the Mishnah. Now, Ibaya lehu, hay mazya milatachat rabe o mila'el. Okay, a very good scientific question. Hair that grows on the body, does it grow from tachat, from the roots, or mila'el, from the tops? Okay, a very interesting question. I think we know the answer from common experience. Hair grows from the roots. But in nature, it's interesting to compare it to other things that grow because, for example, grass is the same as hair, grows from the roots. But trees and plants grow from the tops. The trunk gets a little wider every year, but the height growth comes from the branches on top that continue to grow upwards. A tree doesn't grow out of the ground, whereas grass does push up out of the ground. So in nature, there are all kinds of different ways of growing. So this is a pretty interesting question. Okay, so we can imagine a bunch of science experiments we could do to test this out, and the rabbis showed themselves to be quite good scientists and follow the scientific method here, combined with tradition. Okay, first of all, we ask, before answering this question, lemay nafka who cares, right? This is not a science textbook here, right? Why are you asking the question? And the answer is, if these bandits came and they cut a person's hair, but they didn't shave him altogether down to the skin, they left a little bit of hair, right? They just shaved it very close, but they left enough hair that you could bend it and it would extend to its root. Like you can make a little loop or cut or bend it in half. So if the hair is very short stubble, then you can't do that. But if it's long enough that you can bend it over and touch its bottom, then you don't have to wait 30 days. So this is important halacha. This law in the Mishnah that says 30 days. That's only if the person became totally bald. But if they trimmed their hair, but they had some days, a little bit left, that's okay. We're going to see the amount of time to grow that much that it can be bent is 7 days. Okay, so that's why it makes a difference. If you say that hair grows from the bottom, so that means that the original hair that the person had when he became a Nazir, that was originally all his hair and on that day, and then as it grows, the original hair gets pushed up to the top. So that if the bandits come and they cut just let's say half of it, like mowing grass, they just cut the top half of it off, then they're removing that which was the nizirut hair, the hair that he had as a nazir, and therefore, since he doesn't have that original hair growth, so because all cut off, then he's going to have to wait extra time. He's going to need 30 days worth of hair growth instead. However, if you say that the growth is from the top, like trees grow, and that way, when he became a Nazir, he had some growth, and then after a few days he got more growth. The bandits come and cut off the top half. Well, that's all the new growth. The original growth that he had is still there, and that's sufficient to bend over. And therefore, he does not have to add time to his any time to his nizirut. He can conclude right then and there, because that would be that's the same as here. As long as you have enough hair that was not cut off from the original growth that you could bend over, then that's fine. So this does actually make a very practical difference. All right, so we're going to have several proofs. Tashema meha'in ba'chaya dekaem be'ikva debinta v'isakadatech miletachat rabe beresha debinta ba'elemekam. The first proof is from inba, that's a louse, haya, that's alive. Because where are you always going to find lice? If you look in someone's head, if they have lice, it's always at the root of the hair. That makes sense, because the lice feed on the person's skin, at the scalp, and so they're always there. Now, if you say that hair grows from the root, well then, if it starts off at the root, let's say, because it's maybe it's born there, right? This actually could be used, this source, as a proof that the rabbis did know about lice eggs, because the eggs are implanted at the base, at the skull, at the scalp. And then so they're born there. Okay, but that's a side discussion. So if you say it grows from the bottom, then the louse stays in that spot, and then as the hair grows up, the louse should be at the top, right? It should get pushed up. Just like a piece of grass, if you put a little tape on a piece of grass and you'd come back a few days later, right, you'd see it stuck. You'd put a tape at the bottom. After a few days, you'd see it rise up. And so this louse that's sticking onto that spot in the hair would rise up. But we don't find that. Instead, we find that it stays at the bottom. So that means that hair grows from the top, right? And we say, no. It actually hair grows from the bottom. And it's true that the lice would be pushed up if it wasn't doing anything, but a live louse, like always, keeps going down. It's always going back toward the scalp, so it can suck up more blood from the scalp. And so that's why. So that's why this is no proof. Okay, so we cannot prove it from live lice, but how about a dead lice? Tashema inba meta beresha debinta. Dead louse, you always find it at the tip of the hair. Now, Now, if hair grows from the tip, then the dead louse, should stay at the root. When the louse was alive, it was at the root, and so if it grows from the tip, then the tip has nothing to do with the root. It would stay at the root, but it doesn't. We find that dead lice are at the tip. So that means when it died at the root, it stayed there, and then after time, as the hair grew from the root, then it pushed the hair up along with the lice, and that's why dead lice are found at the tip. So that proves that hair grows from the root, right? Not necessarily. No, maybe dead lice, because they have no strength, So then they just go up with the growth of the hair. In other words, even though it's growing from the tip, but the dead lice, they're just going to get pulled down by the force of gravity. Imagine someone's hair is like long, and then so the tips of the hair fall down. And just like the tips of the hair fall down, eventually the lice, the dead lice that are attached to it, are going to slowly drop down to the edges of the hair. So they're going to do that either way, right? You see the scientific method here. They're bringing a hypothesis and, right, saying this is a cause to it, but this is necessarily, they could be a different cause that resulted in that same result. And so it's not necessarily because of that. So we need a foolproof explanation, a foolproof reason to prove one way or another. All right, so we cannot prove either way from lice. So let's try another one. Tashema mebelorit dekushiyim debatad megadilim la rafia miletachat. You can tell from these long hair braids of kushiyim. So they apparently had long hair. Maybe it was braided in a certain way. And after a while, it becomes loose underneath, right? Anyone who has braids knows this, right? You leave braids in for a while, and then it's at the roots, then it becomes all loose and messy. But the tips remain just fine, braided just as before. So this proves that hair grows from the roots. And so is that a good proof? No. No, they're also because it crumples from a person lying on it, so that becomes loose underneath. When you make a braid very tight to the head, so doesn't have a lot of room to wiggle, and then as you're constantly pushing it, lying on it, that's going to cause the bottom to loosen up. That's why the bottom is loose, not necessarily because it grows from the bottom. And so no proof from braided hair. Okay, Tashema mesikreta derafe amra meletachat vetanya. So maybe we can prove it from the dye that we put on sheep, which becomes loose underneath. When shepherds wanted to mark off which sheep is ma'aser, right, and have them pass through, then every 10th they would mark with red dye. So the red dye would be on that top layer, and over time, the top layer, that red dye, would make that wool hard, whereas new wool would grow from underneath that was soft and also was white, was not dyed. So you can tell from there that the new growth of wool is from the base, from the skin. Now, this word vitanya seems out of place here because vitanya doesn't introduce any baraita or anything. So it's very curious what this is doing here. Let's check the manuscripts, and we see that vitanya does appear in Vilna and also does appear in Munich, but is not in the Venice edition and is also not in the Vatican manuscript. So it seems that it does not belong there, meletachat, period. If you notice the manuscripts, that Munich has Vitanya, Vatican just has Vitu and doesn't have Vitanya, whereas Munich does not have Vitu. So what happened here, Vitu is adding another proof that we're about to see. I think what happened is that Vav Taf abbreviation, or even the Vav Taf Vav, because the Vav can kind of look like a Nun, the abbreviation someone assumed was Vitanya, and that made it into the Vilna edition Vitanya. But actually in the original it just said Vitu, not Vitanya. There is no Braita here. Okay, that's very important. You can see how people struggle to explain this word Vitanya. Okay, Vitu, kad sabya dik nehon havran ikbe nimahon shemamina miletachat rabe shemamina. And also, when old men dye their beards, and so they'll say they dye it black, but their natural hair is white. So after a while, you come back and you find that the roots of their hair are white. And so you can see clearly that it's growing from the roots. So Shemawina, we learn from this that it in fact grows from the bottom. All right, and that is the final conclusion. Okay, this is interesting for a different reason. There is a discussion in Halacha whether men are allowed to dye their beards or whether that is lo tilbash gever, that is doing something that women do. Women dye their hair, but men therefore should not dye their hair. So that's this can be brought as a proof that it seems to talk about elders dyeing their hair like it's a regular thing and doesn't assume that it's prohibited. Okay. Anyway, this is a source for that discussion. Okay. Ve'ela ha de Tanya. Nazir shegilchuhu listim v'shiru bo kedei lachof rosho leikaro eno soter. Now that we have concluded that scientifically, in fact, a hair grows from the root. Now we have to go back and explain the Beraita that says a Nazir where bandits came and they shaved, they gave him a trim, and they left enough there that you still could make a loop with what was there before. So enos soter, he does not have to take off any days. Well, why not? Since it grows from the root, and so that original hair that he had when he became a Nazir is now pushed up. And is cut off. So since it grows from the root and they cut off that original hair, so then that should undo the original Nazirut. And he's going to have to wait to get 30 days worth of new hair to have enough to shave for the conclusion. And the answer is Kigon shel gilchuhu achar melot. Umane Rabbi Eliezer hidamar kol achar melot shib'a soter. Maybe we're talking about a case here where the bandits came and shaved him after he was already completed the counting, right? He didn't finish and do all the sacrifices yet, but he finished the counting. Since he finished the counting, so he doesn't have to go all the way back and do another 30 days. Rather, he just has to do 7 more days. And this would follow the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer that says, after you finished counting the main days and you made it through, then you only have to negate 7. You only have to add 7. My tamad Rabbi Eliezer, yalif tiglah hatahara, metiglah hatumah, matiglah hatumah shib'ah, af tiglah hatahara shib'ah. What's the source for Rabbi Eliezer? He makes a comparison between shaving when someone is tahor from shaving of a Nazir who becomes tameh, meaning he becomes tameh after he finished all the days. He finished counting all the days, and on the day that he's bringing his korbanot, before he finished his korbanot, he became tameh. So this person is going to have to add 7 days. Well, he's naturally going to have to add 7 days because tameh means tameh met. And since he's tameh met, it's going to take him 7 days to become pure. He can't bring his korbanot until he becomes pure. So if he finished all his days, didn't bring korbanot yet, becomes tameh, so then he waits 7 days, becomes tahor, and then he can bring his korbanot and shave. So just like tiglachat after becoming tameh at the end of the period is 7 days, so too if he's tahor, he didn't become tameh at all, but he got a trim. And so now he can't shave on that day. So he has to wait 7 days, and then at least he has enough growth that he can bend it over, and so that's 7 days. So that's what we're talking about here. Even though you're right, the original part of the growth is gone because they trimmed it. And you're right, if he was in the middle of his nizirut, then that would be a problem. But he's at the end of Nizirut, and we're following Rabbi Eliezer. This is known to the sages, and everybody agrees, including Rabbi Eliezer, that every 7 days there's enough of growth to bend it at the root, and that's why even if he finished counting his days, and even if they cut off all his hair, but he has 7 days of growth from then on, that's okay, right? But in the middle if it got cut off in the middle before he finished it, then you're right indeed, he would need 30 days of new growth. Okay, now back to the Mishnah that said Nazir shegeleach ben betar ben bezog o shesifsef kol shehu hayav. Even though the pasuk says ta'ar, the Mishnah teaches, ta'ar meaning a razor, the Mishnah teaches that it doesn't matter whether you use a razor or scissors or he pulled it out, no matter what, he would be liable, lashes for if he cut his hair, no matter how. Okay, so now we're going to look for the proof. We're going to see several different opinions. Tanur Banan. Ta'ar en li ela ta'ar talash meret sifsef kol shehu minayin tamod omar kadosh yeh gadel pera se'ar rosho tibrer bi Yoshia. So the Baraita teaches, says in Pasuk Ta'ar. Let's look at the Pasuk inside so we can see the full context here. Kol yemei neder nizro ta'ar lo ya'avor al rosho ad melot hayamim asher yazir ladonai kodesh yeh gadel pera se'ar rosho. So you see there's a lo taseh and a naseh mentioned here. All the days of his nizirut, a razor cannot touch his head until he finishes all the days. We're going to learn from this also that when he does finish the days, then he has to actually has to use a razor for the completion ceremony. Okay, so that's the negative prohibition. But then he says his hair is holy and it has to be left to grow. Gadel pera sadosho, right? It has to be left to grow untrimmed. So this is a positive commandment as well. Okay, so let's see how Rabbi Yoshia learns it. Since it says true, it says ta'ad, which is the negative commandment, right? Ta'ad lo yavor al dosho, but then it also says kadosh yeh gadel pera, that he has to add, that he has to let it grow. And so if he uses a razor, then he violates a lo ta'aseh, which would be liable to lashes. If he cuts it with a scissor, then that would violate a positive commandment. Positive commandment does not get lashes. So it seems that Rabbi Yoshia is not the author of the Mishnah. Okay, now another opinion. Rabbi Yonatan omer, ta'ad en li ela ta'ad, meret talash yifsef kol shehu patur. V'aketib kadosh yeh, memra de'im gileach la betad, ka'im ale be'aseh ve'lo ta'aseh. So since it says a razor, I would only know a razor. What if he tears it out, uproots it, pulls any amount in other ways? Patur, that person is exempt, no punishment, maybe even allowed. There's no prohibition here. Now, but it says kadosh yeh gadel pera, that he has to let it grow. No, that is only talking about with a razor. So that if it's done with a razor, there's a lo taseh and an aseh. So there's a double header for razor. Lo ta'aseh, that would require lashes and an aseh, but all that applies only to a razor, and there is no prohibition, not an aseh and not a lo ta'aseh, to pulling it out without a razor. That's the Bionatan. So he's even more lenient than the Bioshaya. So the Bionatan also cannot be the author of our Mishnah that says hayav lashes for any possibility. So let's keep going. Tanya idach, there is yet another braita that has another opinion. It says ta'ar en li ela ta'ar talash merat sifsef kol shehu minayin tamodomar lo yavor al rosho. Oh, so the word ta'ar by itself, I would know a razor. And how do you know tearing, uprooting, or pulling any amount? Because it says lo yavor rosho, and I could read that independently, right, without the word ta'ar. So therefore, nothing can cut it on his head. Okay. Now, since you're going to include everything, this kind of a perat uklal, lo yavor, nothing, no way, thing that will cut his hair, not a scissor and not his hand, pulling it out can be on his head. So since we're going to include everything, why bother mentioning razor specifically? So because otherwise we would have no source that the concluding ceremony has to be done with a razor. Finally, when he's done, he does shave all his head, and for that he can't just pull out his hair, or he has to use a razor. That's why it has the word ta'ad there. Okay, so actually this could be the author of our Mishnah, whoever is the author of this baraita, because we're learning all ways of removing the hair from a lo ta'aseh. So they, in fact, all would receive lashes. Now, one more point. Why can't we learn it from a mesorah? A mesorah also has to shave with a razor, and the mesorah, in fact, shaves not only his head, but all of his body when he's done, when he's purified. And the reason is because a mesorah is mahmir, in that he has to shave all of his body. So you can't learn a lenient law, which is Nazir, from a stringent law, which is mesorah, to say, oh, the stringency applies to a Mesorah, it also applies to a Nazir. Not necessarily. The Mesorah has other chumrot, so maybe only a Mesorah. So that's why we need the word ta'ad in Nazir, because I couldn't learn it from Mesorah. I need the word ta'ad to tell me about the conclusion ceremony. But from lo ya'avod, we learn all forms of removal of hair are prohibited by a lo ta'aseh. Okay, so that's the Tanakama in this baraita. Now the B, that's a Biuda Nasi Omer, eno sarich. No, I don't need your complicated derivation. I agree, but in an easier way. Hareu Omer ta'ad lo yavol al rosho ad melot. HaTorah amara achar melot lo tehe tiglachat ela beta'ad. Right, if you look at the full pasuk, says ta'ad lo yavol rosho ad melot. You cannot use a razor on his head until he finishes his days. Oh, why does he have to say until you finish the days? That means when you do finish the days, then you can use a ta'ad. So Rabbi is agreeing, but he's reading it more smoothly, and so they all go together as one. Ta'ad, no ta'ad, until then, so I could learn two things from one, that you can't use a razor during this time, but you must use a razor at the end. Now we'll ask for the B. Vakativ ta'ad lo ya'avor al rosho. The question is, what are you going to do with this lo ya'avor al rosho, which can be read independently, right? Just like the Tanakama did. And the Rabbi says, yes, you're right. I can also read that independently, right? Ta'ad is one phrase, lo ya'avor al rosho. La'avor ala b'shnei lavin, to teach me that if one shaves with a razor, then he actually violates two prohibitions. One, just from the word ta'ad, and then another from lo ya'avor al rosho. Whereas if he uses pulling out his hair or some other means, then the ta'ad does not apply, but lo ya'avor al rosho would apply, so they would only be liable to one prohibition. But no matter what, they would be liable to something. No matter how they took out their hair, they would violate at least one aseh. With a ta'ad, that would be two asehs. And so the Mishnah could also be according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen ve'amen.